December 13th, 1943. 25,000 feet above the East China Sea. The cockpit vibrates with a familiar, comforting hum as Lieutenant Saburo Tanaka eases his Mitsubishi A6M0 into a shallow climb. Frost rims the edges of the canopy. His oxygen mask smells faintly of rubber and old sweat. Below him, broken cloud scatters sunlight across the water like shards of glass. Tanaka is 23 years old. He has been flying combat missions since Guadalcanal. He has seen American aircraft burn, spiral, and vanish into the sea. He has watched enemy pilots bail out too late, parachutes snapping open only moments before impact. And he has learned, through hard experience, what American fighters look like when they die. They are fast in a straight line, heavy on the controls, predictable, not like the Zero, not like him. Off his left wing, another Japanese pilot laughs over the radio as a formation of American bombers crawls across the sky far below. Silver shapes, boxy, slow, escorted by fighters that look awkward even from a distance. "Look at them," the voice says. "Those new ones. Ugly things." Tanaka glances down. Long nose, bubble canopy, laminar wings that seem too straight, too clean. The aircraft do not turn sharply. They do not climb like Zeros. They do not feel threatening. P-51 Mustangs. The Americans have begun fielding them in small numbers over the Pacific and China. Early intelligence reports dismiss them as another attempt. Another aircraft that looks good on paper and fails in combat. Their range is limited, their pilots inexperienced, their performance unremarkable compared to the agile fighters Japan has mastered since the opening days of the war. Tanaka banks gently, lining up for the dive. "They're too far from home," another pilot says. "Same mistake every time." It has been true so far. American bombers push forward. Their escorts peel away early, fuel gauges falling. Then the Japanese fighters descend, and the bombers die alone. That pattern has repeated itself across the Pacific and over Europe alike. The Americans can build bombers faster than anyone thought possible. B-17s, B-24s, 4 engines, bristling with guns. But without fighters to stay with them, the formations bleed. The Japanese pilots have watched it happen over Rabaul. The Germans have watched it happen over Schweinfurt. Everyone learns the same lesson. Bombers cannot survive without escorts. Escorts cannot survive without range. Tanaka dives. The Zero accelerates smoothly, effortlessly. The Mustang below him reacts late, rolling clumsily, unable to match the tight turn. Tanaka squeezes the trigger. His cannons chatter. Tracers stitch across the American fighter's wing. The P-51 falls away, trailing smoke. Another victory. Another confirmation. On the ground, in Japanese briefing rooms and German staff officers alike, the conclusion seems obvious. The Mustang is not the answer. It is just another American experiment. Fast, perhaps, but flawed by the same limitation that has haunted Allied air power since the beginning of the war: distance. Over Germany, Luftwaffe pilots share the same confidence. They watch American fighters turn back at the edge of the Reich. They time their interceptions. They conserve fuel. They wait. And when the bombers come on alone, they tear into them with practiced efficiency. In December 1943, the 8th Air Force loses dozens of aircraft in a single day over Bremen and Münster. Crews bail out over hostile territory. Bombers crash short of the coast. Entire formations return shredded. The Mustang does not change that, yet. In Berlin, Reichsmarschall Göring fumes, but reassures his commanders. "The Americans cannot escort their bombers all the way here," he says. "They never will." In Tokyo, staff officers studying Pacific air combat nod in agreement. The Americans build powerful machines, but they still do not understand air war the way their enemies do. Tanaka lands that afternoon with fuel to spare. He climbs from the cockpit, stretches stiff muscles, lights a cigarette with shaking hands that still hum from combat. Another Mustang has fallen. Another pilot has learned the same lesson. Range wins wars. Agility kills enemies. The Zero has both, or so it seems, but thousands of miles away, in hangars and test fields across the United States, engineers are quietly solving a problem no enemy pilot can see from the cockpit. Not by redesigning the airplane, but by redefining how it will be used. And when that solution arrives in the spring of 1944, it will not announce itself with a new silhouette or a dramatic performance leap. It will arrive as something almost insulting in its simplicity. Extra fuel, bolted beneath the wings, waiting. January 1944, Wright Field, Ohio. The wind cuts across the runway, sharp and dry, carrying the smell of snow and aviation fuel. Major Thomas J. Hitchcock, U.S. Army Air Forces, stands with his hands buried in his coat pockets, watching a P-51 idle on the tarmac. Its Merlin engine ticks and pops as it cools, the sound like a clock counting down something no one can see. Hitchcock has been fighting this war from conference rooms. Before Pearl Harbor, he had been an observer in Britain, watching the Royal Air Force bleed itself against German defenses. He had listened as British commanders argued about daylight bombing versus night raids, about losses that could not be sustained, about the grim arithmetic of air war. Now that arithmetic sits in front of him, painted olive drab. The Mustang is fast. It climbs well. At altitude, it performs beautifully, and it still cannot go far enough. Inside a nearby hangar, engineers argue quietly over charts pinned to plywood walls. Lines stretch from English airfields deep into Germany, to Frankfurt, to Leipzig, to Berlin itself. Each line stops short. Fuel, always fuel. The bomber crews can reach these targets, barely. But the fighters peel away, turning back while the bombers continue on alone, into flak and interceptors that have been waiting patiently. Hitchcock rubs his eyes. The 8th Air Force is losing the air war, not because of poor pilots or inferior machines, but because it cannot stay. Every mission ends the same way. Escort fighters turn back. German fighters swarm. Bombers die. The Luftwaffe does not need to defeat the Americans in a single decisive battle. It only needs to make the cost unbearable. And it is working. On January 11th, 1944, an American raid on Oschersleben loses over 60 bombers. Crews are shot down, captured, killed. Entire squadrons are rendered combat ineffective in a single afternoon. General Jimmy Doolittle, newly appointed commander of the 8th Air Force, studies the reports with a grim expression. He does not ask how many aircraft were lost. He asks how many will fly again tomorrow. The answer is not reassuring. Doolittle understands something his predecessors have avoided. The goal is no longer to protect bombers at all costs. The goal is to destroy the enemy fighter force, even if that means accepting bomber losses in the short term. But to do that, the fighters must reach the enemy's home. Factories, airfields, assembly plants, and Berlin. The Mustang is the only aircraft with the performance to fight German fighters on equal terms at altitude. But performance without endurance is useless. Then quietly the solution begins to spread, not through a dramatic announcement, not through a new aircraft designation, but through logistics orders and maintenance manuals. External fuel tanks, drop tanks. The concept is not new. Fighters have carried external fuel before. The problem has always been drag. The tanks slow the aircraft, reduce maneuverability, make fighters vulnerable in combat. The Zero pilots Tanaka trained with had learned long ago to jettison external tanks the moment combat began. But the Mustang is different. Its laminar flow wing handles drag better than expected. Its Merlin engine maintains power at altitude. And crucially, American industry can produce fuel tanks in absurd numbers. Standardized, disposable, designed to be dropped without hesitation. In February 1944, squadrons in England begin receiving them. 2 tanks, 75 gallons each, bolted beneath the wings. The first pilots are skeptical. They taxi out heavier, slower, less agile. Takeoffs feel sluggish. Climbs are longer. Everything about the aircraft feels compromised. Until they look at the fuel gauges, the needles move slower, much slower. On February the 20th, 1944, big week, the test comes. Hundreds of bombers launch toward Germany. This time, the escorts do not turn back over the Dutch coast. They keep going. Mustangs cruise above the formations, fuel tanks still attached, engines humming steadily. German radar stations report something strange. American fighters are not peeling away. They are staying. Over Brunswick, Luftwaffe pilots scramble as usual, expecting the same pattern. Instead, they climb into a sky already occupied. The Mustangs are there, not low, not defensive, but hunting. The German pilots attack anyway. They have done this before. They discover the mistake almost immediately. The Mustangs drop their tanks. The change is instant. Weight vanishes. Drag disappears. The fighters surge forward with sudden violence. The Mustang is no longer a compromised escort. It is a predator. German pilots, accustomed to dictating the terms of engagement, find themselves pursued, not evaded. The Mustangs do not cling to the bombers anymore. They roam ahead, above, behind. They dive on climbing interceptors. They strafe airfields. They chase fleeing fighters down to the deck. And when fuel runs low, they still have enough to come home. Back in Japan, Tanaka reads intercepted reports weeks later with mild curiosity. They speak of American fighters appearing deeper than before, of increased losses, of engagements that do not follow expected patterns. He dismisses them. Every enemy claims a turning point. But in Europe, the numbers begin to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but unmistakably. The Luftwaffe loses pilots faster than it can train replacements. Experienced aces die. New pilots take their place. Brave, eager, and unprepared. The Mustangs return day after day. They escort bombers to Berlin, and then they escort them home. For the first time in the war, distance has stopped protecting the defender. The problem of range, the problem everyone thought unsolvable, has been defeated not by genius, but by persistence, production, and a willingness to throw away what slows you down. Extra fuel, dropped when no longer needed, and the sky over Germany begins to change forever. March 6, 1944, 25,000 feet over central Germany. The contrails arrive first. Thin white scars streaking the blue, cutting across the sky at odd angles. Not the neat, predictable streams German pilots have learned to read, but chaotic, overlapping patterns that suggest movement without order. Hauptmann Erich Hartmann, Jagdgeschwader 42, tightens his harness and scans upward. His Messerschmitt Bf 109 shudders slightly as he pushes the throttle forward, climbing hard. He has survived this long by discipline, by patience, by never fighting on the enemy's terms. But today the terms are unclear. Radar reports had warned of heavy bomber formations inbound. That is normal. The flak batteries are already awake below, black bursts blooming like ink stains around the American boxes. Hartmann expects the escorts to turn back soon. They always do. Instead, he spots them. Silver flashes high above the bombers. Too high, too far in. "Mustangs," his wingman says over the radio, voice tight. Hartmann frowns. That makes no sense. The Americans should not be here. Not with fighters. Not this deep. He has chased thunderbolts and lightnings before. Heavy, fast in a dive. Dangerous in bursts, but always tethered to fuel limits. They fight, then they leave. These do not leave. Hartmann banks, trying to gain position, but the Mustangs are already moving, not clustering around bombers, not reacting defensively. They sweep across the sky in pairs, loose, fluid, hunting shapes rather than protecting targets. This is new. The first attack comes from above. A Mustang drops out of the sun, firing a short, precise burst. Hartmann jerks the stick, rolls hard, feels rounds crack past his canopy. He dives instinctively, the Bf-109 screaming as it picks up speed. The Mustang follows, not briefly, not cautiously. It stays with him. Hartmann levels out near the cloud base, pulls into a climbing turn, a maneuver that has saved him countless times. The Mustang climbs too, its Merlin engine howling, nose steady, refusing to fall away. This should not be possible. The fight compresses into seconds. Hartmann breaks left, then right, bleeding energy. The Mustang overshoots, barely, and Hartmann fires. The tracers miss. The American pilot is already pulling vertical again, repositioning with alarming ease. Hartmann realizes the truth with a chill that has nothing to do with altitude. The Americans are not worried about fuel. They are not fighting like men who need to go home soon. They are fighting like men who intend to stay. Below them, the bomber formation presses on. Bomb bay doors open. The ground shudders as explosives walk across factories, rail yards, airfields. Targets once thought safe by distance alone. German command radios crackle with confusion. Fighters are requesting vectors. Units are colliding. Formations are breaking. The Mustangs are everywhere and nowhere, not massed, not concentrated, but persistent. They pounce, disengage, reappear. They do not defend bombers. They erase resistance. Back in England, General Doolittle watches mission reports pile up. Losses are still heavy. Bombers are still falling. But something fundamental has shifted. German fighters are being destroyed not over targets, but on the way up, on the way down, on the ground. Airfields are strafed. Pilots are killed before they ever reach altitude. Training units are hit. Fuel depots burn. The Luftwaffe is bleeding where it cannot afford to bleed. In Japan, Tanaka hears rumors months later from German liaison officers. They speak with unfamiliar unease about American escort fighters that do not leave, about skies that no longer offer sanctuary. Tanaka listens politely. He still believes distance matters. He still believes discipline and timing will overcome technology. He does not yet understand what Europe has learned the hard way. That air superiority is not about winning engagements. It is about denying the enemy rest. By April 1944, German fighter losses are catastrophic. Replacement pilots arrive with barely enough training to take off, let alone fight Mustangs flown by men who have survived dozens of missions. The imbalance compounds daily. Factories produce fighters faster, but pilots die faster still. The sky becomes a place of attrition, not honor, and for the first time since the war began, the Luftwaffe cannot choose when to fight. The Mustangs are always there, waiting. April 29, 1944. Lechfeld Air Base, southern Germany. The runway is littered with wreckage. Burned-out fighters sit nose down in the grass where they were hit while taxiing. Others are cratered hulks near the dispersal pens, their camouflage useless against the accuracy of American strafing runs. Ground crews move cautiously now, glancing upward every few seconds, tools forgotten in their hands. Oberleutnant Karl Fischer, a former instructor pilot, watches smoke drift across the field and understands something he has not allowed himself to think until this moment. They are being hunted before the war even begins each day. The Luftwaffe was built to fight battles in the air. Intercept the bombers, break the formations, withdraw, repair, repeat. But the Mustangs have changed the rhythm. They arrive early. They stay late. They follow fighters home. Fischer had taken off that morning with half fuel, ordered to conserve what little aviation gasoline remained. The Americans did not care. They were already overhead, circling patiently, like birds waiting for something wounded to move. When Fisher climbed, a Mustang followed. When he dove, it stayed with him. When he ran, it closed the distance. He survived only because another pilot died in front of him. By the time he landed, the airfield was already under attack. The P-51 was never meant to dogfight in tight circles like a Zero or a Spitfire. That was not its role. What made it lethal was something colder: endurance. Drop tanks turned time into a weapon. The Mustang could loiter where other fighters had to leave. It could choose when to engage, and just as critically, when not to. American pilots are told something new before these missions. Don't chase glory, chase opportunity. They are encouraged to range freely, to ignore bombers once threats are broken, to strike wherever the enemy is weakest, climbing, landing, refueling. This is not escort doctrine, it is extermination doctrine. German command responds with familiar tools, new formations, tighter discipline, heavier armament. The FW-190 is upgunned. Rockets are added to intercept bombers from distance. None of it solves the core problem. Every solution requires time. Time to climb, time to assemble, time to disengage. The Americans have removed time from the equation. In Japan, Tanaka studies European after-action summaries months later. He reads them carefully now. The tone has changed. Gone is the confidence. Gone is the belief that technical skill alone can offset American numbers. Instead, the reports talk about pressure. Constant, unrelenting, exhausting. Pilots who never feel safe. Airfields that cannot recover. Training pipelines that collapse before they mature. Tanaka recognizes the danger, but too late. The Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service has its own problems. Fuel shortages, inexperienced pilots, aircraft optimized for range and maneuverability, not protection. And now, the Americans are bringing Mustangs to the Pacific. By the summer of 1944, the Luftwaffe is no longer an effective force. It exists on paper. It flies occasionally. It fights bravely. But it cannot stop the bombers. Factories burn. Synthetic fuel plants are smashed. Rail networks unravel. And above it all, the Mustangs circle. Not because they are invincible, but because they are always there. General Doolittle later describes the shift bluntly. The mission changed from protecting bombers to destroying the enemy's air force wherever it could be found. That sentence marks the death of the Luftwaffe, not in a single battle, not in a dramatic last stand, but in weeks of unbroken pressure. By the time Allied troops land in Normandy, German pilots are exhausted, undertrained, and outnumbered. The sky no longer belongs to them. It belongs to no one, except the aircraft that can stay the longest. June 6, 1944, over Normandy. The sky should be crowded with German fighters. It isn't. As Allied ships choke the channel and paratroopers drop into hedgerows below, American bombers pass overhead in layered formations. Not untouched, not unopposed, but no longer challenged in strength. When German fighters do appear, they arrive in twos and threes, brief flashes, desperate passes, and always somewhere above them, Mustangs. Captain James "Jim" Howard, flying with the 356th Fighter Group, spots the first contrails at 25,000 feet. He pushes the throttle forward, the Merlin engine answering with a smooth, predatory surge. His drop tanks are gone, jettisoned minutes earlier, but he doesn't need them now. This is home territory. The Germans dive toward the beaches, trying to reach the bombers hammering road junctions and rail lines. Howard lets them go, then rolls in behind. He does not chase one aircraft. He breaks the formation. The first German fighter explodes under his guns. The second pulls hard, bleeds speed, and dies seconds later. The third escapes only because cloud intervenes. Howard levels out, heart pounding, scanning again. There are always more bombers to protect. There are fewer fighters to stop. On the ground, German commanders feel the absence more sharply than any explosion. Requests for air cover go unanswered. Pilots report being intercepted after disengaging, after landing, after thinking they were safe. The concept of a rear area has vanished. Airfields that once lay beyond the bomber streams are now targets themselves. Mustangs strafe parked aircraft, fuel trucks, barracks. A single pass can erase months of training and resources. The Luftwaffe tries to adapt. They disperse fields. They hide aircraft under trees. They move operations at night. None of it restores the one thing they need most: time in the air. Training hours are slashed because fuel is scarce. New pilots arrive at the front with a fraction of the experience their predecessors had in 1940. Veteran pilots are pulled from the combat to teach and then pulled back again because losses are too high. The spiral tightens. Across the Pacific, Japanese pilots are watching similar signs emerge. The Americans are not fighting for air superiority in moments anymore. They are fighting for exhaustion. The P-51 arrives in the Marianas late in 1944, its silver wings reflecting a different sun, but carrying the same logic. Long-range escort means B-29s can reach targets once thought unreachable. Japanese fighters rise to meet them. Skilled, brave, often brilliant. But they rise alone. Fuel shortages limit training. Engines wear out. Pilots do not rotate home. And above them, Mustangs wait. Tanaka flies his last escort mission in early 1945. He sees the B-29s at altitude, contrails stretching endlessly, their formation disciplined and unbroken. He climbs to intercept and realizes immediately that something is wrong. The escort does not peel away. It tightens. The Mustangs do not maneuver wildly. They do not dive recklessly. They simply stay between him and the bombers, matching every move, denying every angle. He fires once, misses, breaks away, and the Mustang follows. Tanaka survives the encounter, but the realization is final. This aircraft is not faster because it must be. It is faster because it can be. The Mustang does not need to win quickly. It only needs to win eventually. By early 1945, both Germany and Japan have lost control of their skies, not because they lack courage or skill, but because they lack endurance. Air power has become a war of presence, and the P-51 has turned presence into domination. March 18, 1945. 30,000 feet above central Germany. Lieutenant Robert Bob Goebel, 4th Fighter Group, checks his gauges out of habit more than necessity. Fuel is steady. Oil pressure perfect. The Merlin hums with the same confidence it has shown him since England. Below him, the bomber stream stretches to the horizon. B-17s and B-24s moving in disciplined boxes, silver skins catching the sun through broken cloud. Berlin again. Not a daring raid anymore, just another target on a schedule. What is missing is what Goebel has learned to expect. No contrails rising to meet them. No sudden radio calls. No frantic vectors. No swarms. Minutes pass, then more. A single German fighter appears far below, climbing cautiously, almost tentatively. Goebel watches it for several seconds before pushing the nose down. The German pilot sees him instantly and breaks away, not toward the bombers, but toward the clouds, toward escape. Goebel does not pursue. He doesn't need to, because that fighter will not come back. Across the Reich, the Luftwaffe has reached the end of arithmetic. Aircraft losses exceed production. Pilot losses exceed training capacity. Fuel shortages turn flying into a rationed privilege. Squadrons exist on paper, but not in the air. German pilots still scramble. They still fight. They still die. But they no longer shape the battle. The P-51 has done something no previous Allied fighter managed to do. It has made defense pointless. The bomber crews notice it first in small ways. Fewer evasive maneuvers. Fewer frantic intercom calls. Less time spent staring upward, waiting for attacks that no longer arrive. Gunners begin to complain about boredom. It feels obscene. Months earlier, survival was measured in seconds. Now missions blur together. Dangerous but predictable. Lethal but routine. That is how air superiority ends. Not with drama, but with absence. In Germany, Japanese observers embedded with the Luftwaffe write reports back to Tokyo. They note the same pattern forming over the home islands. American fighters are no longer tied to targets. They roam. They choose when to engage. They choose when to disengage. The Mustang's greatest weapon is not speed, nor firepower, nor range. It is freedom. Freedom to wait. Freedom to deny. Freedom to appear again tomorrow. Japanese pilots had dismissed the P-51 early, for the same reason the Germans had. It did not fit their model of decisive air combat. It was not designed to win a duel. It was designed to end a campaign. By April 1945, Allied bombers strike with impunity. Cities burn. Infrastructure collapses. Rail lines vanish. Oil production flatlines. Armies move by night and still die by day. The skies belong to the Allies, not because the enemy has surrendered, but because he can no longer afford to rise. After the war, captured German and Japanese pilots are interviewed separately, in different languages, on different continents. Their answers echo each other. We could not rest. We could not recover. They were always there. None of them describe the Mustang as terrifying. They describe it as inevitable. That is the distinction. Terror fades. Inevitability endures. The P-51 Mustang did not win the air war in a single battle. It did not arrive as a miracle weapon. It required engines, fuel tanks, logistics, pilots, maintenance crews, doctrine, all aligned. But once it arrived in full force, the war in the air changed irrevocably. The enemy could no longer choose when to fight, only whether to die today or tomorrow. That is when Japanese pilots stopped laughing. That is when German pilots stopped climbing. And that is when strategic bombing ceased to be a gamble. The Mustang made it a certainty, not by brilliance, not by speed alone, but by staying.